Hello there, kia ora. As Shmi Skywalker once said, you can't stop the change any more than you can stop the sun's setting. And the past few days have all been about change in the media. There was an announcement that the RMA was being changed, scrapped, and replaced. Well, an announcement about an announcement. What the government's planning on doing is kind of what Labor was doing, or in the process of when they lost power, that was then scrapped by this government, who then brought back the old RMA, who have now replaced it or are going to replace it again. And their claims are that this is going to streamline the process and cut back on administration and regulation. And they omitted any mention of Te Tiriti, despite the fact that all of the initial reporting and advice that came from inside the government said you should absolutely have a provision for the founding document and a law that deals specifically with the use of land in this country, especially if you want to say these changes are about property rights. You wouldn't be stupid enough to not involve the treaty when you're claiming it's about property rights, would you? Māori Development Minister Tama Pōtaka, he changed his mind about what he knew as well, initially telling reporters that their questions on the removal of those clauses was the first they'd heard about it, before returning to say, well, actually, I did sign off on it because we'll deal with Māori in other ways. Which does sound kind of ominous, but have you seen their track record in this area? There was a change of interviewer at TVNZ when the Prime Minister showed up for his weekly media rounds and was greeted with John Campbell on the breakfast couch. The Prime Minister was suddenly at a loss to answer questions when his electioneering catchphrases fell on deaf ears and resulted in actual pushback for answers. Oh, it was glorious. And a lot of stuttering and filler phrases that he threw in as he struggled to cope with actual accountability. We saw a change in Mark Mitchell's approach to the thuggery and bullying from Brian Tamaki, where instead of staying silent like he has in the past, he snapped back on social media. Actual legislative change or policy direction would be nice, but baby steps, I guess. We saw Immigration New Zealand change their visa application process to allow machines to make decisions about granting visas based on risk assessment input. We saw proposed changes to the electoral maps, which would see 3 Wellington area electorates amalgamated into 2, and boundary changes for about a dozen or so other areas. These include a reshape for the safest national seats in the country, where an MP can literally be condescending to women and known to have beaten a child in an attack with a bed leg and still get voted in. We saw a change to Wellington Central to get rid of that pesky left voting southern areas around Mount Cook and Brooklyn, with the right leaning Kandala, Ngaio, and Wadestown added into Wellington Central. In Auckland, we saw more right leaning voters from Green Lane will now end up in David Seymour's Epsom electorate. We'll have more left leaning voters from other areas that are going to end up in Greg Fleming's Maunga Kaiki electorate, while Mount Albert, Jacinda Ardern's former electorate, is going to lose left leaning voters to Auckland Central and now have more right leaning voters from Balmoral and Sandringham. Analysis from the spin off on this actually put the electorate shifts from left to right or right to left as 5 each way. So, a few little changes, but not the worst changes out there, I guess. Oh, we saw the labour market levels of pessimism change for the worse. We have a new survey out that shows levels of pessimism are reaching levels that we haven't actually seen since the heights of the COVID pandemic. They were caused, according to the report, by the difficulty in finding work for people and the lack of wage growth. We saw changes in how much Aucklanders will be paying for water, with a 7% increase in costs, which is lower than the 26% that they would have gone up when the government came in, cancelled Three Waters, and before they swooped in to claim that they fixed the issue with a local deal. But it's a lot more than the 2.5% increase that they would have had if they'd kept with the initial Three Waters system that Labor was going to put in place. We saw 2 local councils change their mind about not adding fluoride to water, with both Whangarei and Rotorua City Councils agreeing last minute that they would add it to the water supply, as ordered by the Director General of Health, because if they didn't, the councillors who voted to break the law would be held personally liable. And in the case of Whangarei, they'd already accepted funding for machinery to ensure the process, and refusing to go forward with that process would be a breach of the funding requirements that it entailed. We saw the direction of police recruitment drives change from a negative to a positive, with a whole 13 new constables recruited in the government's mission to hire 500 new cops by November. Now, according to the latest data from the police, the same data sets from January had noted that there were actually 72 fewer officers than when National came into power. It's now going in the same direction as the number of gang members, which the report also said had increased by about 600 people since this government came into power. Now, change is not a bad thing. It helps us grow, it helps us learn, and it can help us find new approaches to the world around us. But sometimes change is for change's sake, and that doesn't have any positive benefit except to entrench the way that people see the world and deal with issues, which isn't that positive in a lot of cases. Not every change I mentioned today is bad. Some kind of response from Mark Mitchell on Brian Tamaki is a good step. Seeing actual media pushback on a prime minister who is floundering and can't answer simple questions without a buzzword word salad is great. But seeing changes which are steps backwards, like RMA reform that omits the treaty partnership at the core of the country, that's a bad change. And there are end results that we're seeing, like the increase in gang numbers, which are outcomes that this government was told would occur when they started the process of making the changes to fix problems that didn't exist. And as Shmi Skywalker said, we can't stop change, but being aware of it and how it's happening and how people are pitching it really, they're great tools for us to be able to see what the intention is behind the changes and measure the success of the outcomes as well, which we should all be aware of as we get to that halfway point in the term, when the news isn't necessarily so damaging for a government because there's not an election right around the corner. It's the time for changes that don't make sense or changes that cause harm to be made, because the hope is that you'll forget about it by the time the election rolls around. Hey, thanks for checking out today's video. Make sure you like, share, subscribe so you get more updates as we go along. We deal with these guys for the rest of the year.